Luca.
So good morning, everybody.
Thank you for accepting to chair this session. Okay.
It's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or even good evening, depending on when you are. So we'll start this third day of these conferences. So today we have in this session 3 speakers. So each one of you will have between 25 and 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 10-15 minutes of question and answer and discussion. So we'll start right away with Carlo Delle Donne. I'm sorry for the accent, from the Universidad Sapientia of Rome. And the title of his paper is Ategartes fύsεως ἁπάσης syngeneus oўsης, Koinonia and syngeneia in Plato's philosophy. Carlo, you can start.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen with you. Now you should be seeing my handout. Okay. Is that legible?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, Koinonia is a multifaceted notion in Plato's dialogue. The term covers a wide range of meanings, and it is employed in very different contexts, as the list below shows. First, it may mean association, also in the sense of partnership, friendship, alliance. Not by chance, the term is sometimes coupled with philia. And also the verb koinonia can bear this meaning. Broadly speaking, it may mean community, also in the sense of meeting occasion, or even common condition, common lifestyle. Generically speaking, it may refer to a form of communication or compatibility between abstract concepts. It is used with regard to the joint ownership of wives and children, but this meaning is typical of and limited to the Republic. It refers to a common perceiving, this is the case of a couple of passages from the Republic. It refers to the communion of soul and body, and in this sense, it is important also to consider the employment of koinonos, for example, in the Phaedon, and of koinoneo, again, in the Phaedo. 7. The term is employed with reference to the participation relationship between sensible objects and ideas, and between the ideas themselves, or the medisagene themselves, as we read in the Sophist. And as is evident, the latter meaning is absolutely preeminent in the Sophist, where it becomes nearly technical. It may refer to the mutual relationship among some specific disciplines, and this is the case of a passage from the Republic, and we will take it into account later. It may allude to sexual relationships or even to marriage, as is evident this meaning is exclusively attested in the laws. Hardly ever does it refer to the partaking of a common lineage. It may refer to a sort of horizontal communication among sensible objects, which therefore represent a whole or set. It can be employed with reference to the vertical, so to speak, partaking or communion between human beings and deities. It may refer to the particular kind of dialogic communion, which is founded on logos. In this very sense, see also the employment of koinonos in the Timaeus, for example, and of koinoneo in the Fragilis, and also elsewhere. In some specific context, the term refers to the mixture of flavors or of different species of fire. It may mean usage. Generically speaking, it means also sharing, taking part in, and broadly speaking, once more, it can mean simply set or whole. So the purpose of this paper is to make the case for a theoretically strong connection As the list above shows, there is only one passage where these words are coupled, but were such connection to be proved somehow relevant in one case, it would be legitimate to scrutinize if each philosophical employment of Koinonia entails ipso facto some form of syngeneia or oikeiotes. As a result, syngeneia and oikeiotes will turn out to represent the condition of possibility for Koinonia to take place. The only text where Koinonia, syngeneia, and oikeiotes appear together comes from the Republic, which is text 1 of your handout. It deals with the disciplines in which future philosophers are expected to be trained. And what is more, I said, I take it that if the investigation of all these parties goes far enough to bring out their community and kinship with one another and to infer their affinities, then to busy ourselves with them contributes to our desired end, and the labor taken is not lost, but otherwise it is vain. What can be inferred from this passage when it comes to the relationship between the three notions here at issue? On the face of it, nothing, unfortunately. We are only told that there is some connection between syngeneia, koinonia, and also oikeiotes, as the adjective oikeios suggests. Nonetheless, as for the precise nature of this relationship, Plato leaves us with no clues. But I reckon it cannot be a mere coincidence that these three words are matched in such an argumentatively crucial passage of the dialogue. As I have sketched out above, the hypothesis that will be substantiated hereafter is that koinonia can take place only if there is some form of syngeneia or oikeiotes among the members to be involved in the koinonia itself. In other words, koinonia and syngeneia and also entails syngeneia and also oikeiotes as its necessary condition. A reassessment of the meanings listed before is now in order. Let's get started with the first one here. Philia, in particular, which is a specific form of koinonia, is likely to require oikeiotes to occur. This can be inferred from the leases, for example, 221e, but this very idea can be derived also from the Menexes, 243a and following, where, with regard to etoonti syngeneia, it is said that philian bebaion parekomene. Last but not least, this very conception is clearly stated also in the Gorgias at 507a5. Auto de me enis koinonia philia ucan eie. But also political community, second meaning, requires, broadly speaking, some form of syngeneia among its members, as the stranger from Elea, for example, puts it in the statement. As a matter of fact, perceptual syngeneia is the natural datum which brings about an immediate interhuman association, koinonia. Thus, moderate people only tend to gather with equally moderate people, whereas courageous people are likely to be attracted only by analogously courageous people. But this situation only paves the way to disruption, to dreadful stasis. Therefore, it falls upon the politician to make use of both divine and human bonds in order to artificially create politically correct kinship relationships across the citizenship. In particular, the divine bond depends on a specific kind of kinship across the citizenship, namely their sharing to eigenes on tesukes auton meros. This is an essential and profound kind of syngeneia, unlike the perceptual one mentioned above. But also the human bonds deal with syngeneia, inasmuch as they aim to harmonize different forms of virtue by means of ton epigamion, kai paidon koinonesion, kai ton peritasidias ekdosis kagamus, thereby bringing about a more heterogeneous and also artificial net of kinship relationships across the citizenship. As a result, the koinonia of the polis is strong and balanced. But also the necessity to share wives and children, which is meaning poor, is likely to depend on syngeneia. The city must be united, since stasis is lethal to its life. In the Republic, the privileged means to reach such a purpose seems to be provided by some unifying myth, like that of the noble life, for example. This kind of tales, told by the philosopher politicians, aims to persuade people of their original kinship, ate un syngeneis ontes pantes, which lies behind their social and intellectual differences. This fundamental fact urges them to safeguard their unity as a polis at any cost. Therefore, they being all akin to one another cannot but result into the communion, the koinonia, of wives and children, thereby neutralizing the risk of egoism and corruption. The sixth meaning is a revealing case study. Actually, soul and body are anything but akin or cognate syngeneia. Nevertheless, they are often said to hold a koinonia. But there is no real koinonia between soul and body. This relationship damages the soul, which is forced to transmigrate from one body to the other. Their coexistence is as unpleasant as temporary. And the reason why this koinonia is fragile resides in the thorough heterogeneity between soul and body, which do not have anything in common. They lack any form of oikoiotes or syngeneia. Therefore, they cannot form part of a strong koinonia. Case 7a is a problematic case, at least on the face of it. To the best of my knowledge, there is no Platonic passage where some kind of syngeneia or oikoiotes is said to link sensible objects and with ideas. Now, there are two possible solutions to these aporia, to my mind. The first one runs as follows. To the extent that all of the tokens, so to speak, of a certain type share that very type, genus, which amounts to the corresponding intelligible form, it is legitimate, perhaps, to maintain that the tokens and the type are somehow akin, syngeneis, that is to say, they share the same genus. Sure enough, this willingness to equate intelligible and sensible entities may lead, and actually leads, to the notorious third man argument. So if this hypothesis falls short of the truth, another option would still be left on the table. Both of the occurrences, these two ones, both of the occurrences of the term can be philosophically undermined. The employment of koinonia in the Tito occurs in a context where several terms are tested, so to speak, in order to efficaciously express the participation relationship. Hence, koinonia must be nothing but an unfortunate linguistic attempt, which is echoed only in one passage from the presumably contemporary Republic. 7b, instead, is the most remarkable case. Syngeneia is pervasive across the intelligible world, and it grants the latter with strong ontological homogeneity. And what is most important, this fact amounts to the notorious Koinonia von Donne, which is pivotal, which is a pivotal issue in Plato's philosophy. So both syngeneia and Koinonia von Donne are the condition of possibility of dialectic and of philosophy. For were the Ede not to be syngeneis, there wouldn't be any communication, koinonia, among them. And were Koinonia von Donne not to take place, no logos and no philosophy would be possible at all. As a mere speculation, One might venture to identify the causal factor responsible for this syngeneia with the medicine genus of being on. For anything to be, an analogous, as we read in the Sophist, potentiality to be acted upon or to act, etopaskin edrandiunamis, is required. But in the intelligible realm, we are told that to act and to be acted upon amount to communicating, koinonein, and being communicated, koinoneste. And communication, an absence of communication, entails koinonia ton aidon. As a consequence, to the extent that any form is, first, it participates in being, and consequently, second, it turns out to be able to hold or not to hold relationships with any other form in the terms of koinonia. Therefore, being grants intelligible living being with an all-pervasive inner cohesion with the possibility of koinonia. 8 has been already discussed above, though briefly, and I would like to add only a few remarks here. Actually, inter-eidetic syngeneia entails the mutual oikeiotes of those disciplines which form part of the philosophical training of the philosopher kings in the Republic. The syngeneia results from a functional analogy typical of those sciences. All of them are capable of reorientating, si metastreptikon epi tentuontostean, the soul towards intelligible, thus waking noises up egestitates noesios. Moreover, also etuontos fusis and themathemata exhibit a form of oikeiotes, and it is the philosopher who should synoptically, ex synopsin, comprehend its network of ontoepistemological kinship relationships. More precisely, the set of ontological relationships, the framework of etuontos fusis, entails and is perfectly mirrored by a set of epistemological kinship relations across the correspondent disciplines. Hence, as a result of their kinship, these sciences exhibit a disciplinary koinonia. The 11th case is perfectly in tune with the analysis conducted so far. Apart from the meaning, where the expression ategartes fuseios ἁπάσης syngeneus uses is anything but fastigious, a form of empirical and horizontal syngeneia, which results into koinonia, is well attested also in the statement, for example. It is text 2 of your handout. There, people instantiating the same part of the whole virtue are mutually linked by means of immediate kinship relationship. This is the text, which unfortunately I cannot read now. The 12th meaning requires syngeneia as its condition of possibility too, as well. The kinship between human beings and the divine is well attested in the dialogues, provided that divine is taken to refer to the intelligible. In this sense, there are several passages where this vertical kinship is put forward. This is text 3, which I'm going to read. And we must note the things of which it has apprehensions and the associations with which it yearns as being itself akin to the divine and immortal and to the eternal being, and so consider what it might be if it followed the gleam unreversibly and were raised by this impulse out of the depths of this sea in which it is now sunk, and were cleansed and scraped free of the rocks and barnacles, which, because it now sits on earth, cling to it in wild profusion on earthy and stony oppression by reason of these fissings that are accounted happy. Such kind of syngeneia is of pivotal importance for several reasons. First of all, this vertical and asymmetric syngeneia grants the upper dimension of reality, the intelligible, and the lower one, human nous, with some form of communication of Koinonia. They are put in touch, so to speak, by means of syngeneia, thus granting reality as a whole with inner cohesion. Moreover, without an ontological homogeneity between the soul and intelligible, no prenatal acquaintance with the ideas would have ever been possible for the disembodied soul. And were that prenatal event not to have occurred, no knowledge at all would have been possible for the embodied soul. In other words, this asymmetric syngeneia is a condition of possibility of the prenatal vision of the form, which is in its turn the condition of possibility, at least on the face of it, of everyday knowledge. As a matter of fact, the cruciality of this theory would be better appreciated if one considered the paralyzing potential inherent to Menin's paradox. The essential continuity between the soul and intelligible can be damaged, and it is damaged when the soul is embodied, but it can never be thoroughly erased. Thus, intellectual inquiry and noetic cognition always turn out to be possible, and Menin's paradox is neutralized once and for all. Last but not least, along with a dialogic communion, also a dialogic kinship, so to speak, can be found at work in the dialogue. This is the 13th meaning. In the statement, for example, we are explicitly told that only logoi can make real syngeneia among people come to the fore. This is text 4 of our handout. And besides, stranger, it seems to me that you're both related to me after a fashion. One of them, anyhow, as you say, looks like me in its cast of countenance, and the other has the same name and appellation, which implies some sort of kinship. Of course, we ought always to be eager to get acquainted with our relatives by debating with them. Dei de tus gesyngeneitemas ei protiumos dialogon anagnorisei. Actually, Socrates does not claim that for a dialogic communion, Koinonia, to take place, something like a previous kinship among the interlocutors is required. He only maintains that logoi represent the legitimate means whereby an already existing profound kinship among the discussants can be shown. But in the dialogue, there are some traces of a form of syngeneia that horizontally equates people, thus enabling them to intellectually and hence also dialectically interact with one another. Each individual nous is syngenes, akin to any other nous. Each of them belongs to the same genre, genus, and all of them are closely akin, syngenes. Thus, human beings happen to be bound together in a fully natural way by means of a horizontal and noetic syngeneia. In other words, men are naturally akin in as much as they are all somehow demonic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlo. So we have some time for discussion, about 15 minutes. So if you have a question, you can react and just put your on the screen. You have the button to put your hand up, and I will take your name, and then you can ask your question to Carlo. So let's see if there are some questions. Yes. So Christophe.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for the talk. I have a very, very short question. Obviously, on your categorization 7a and 7b, and you've put the notorious passage we came across that very often, Republic 476a. You've put that to your mode 7a and not to your mode 7a and 7b. And my question would then be, how do you understand the allelon in that context? I mean, it's clear it also describes the koinonia with the somata and the praxis, but also allelon, and what is allelon then, if it is not your mode 7b? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Actually, I get under the impression that allelon refers to the intelligible entities themselves. So, because I think that Plato's philosophy hasn't changed that much, I mean, from one dialogue to the other. So I suspect it to refer to the Koinonia Donne, which is better and in a more conspicuous way thematized in the Sophist.
Okay, thank you.
Another question. Let me see if I can see anyone. You can also write on the chat if you have some problems about asking a question. So I don't see, just check any question.
This may be a compliment that you were so clear and persuasive that nobody has anything to say.
It seems to be the case.
I hope so. I really hope so.
There is a question from Margarita, which we can't hear you because you should now.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon. I'm not sure what time everyone is at. So thank you, Carlo, for your paper. Very helpful to have all the citations, locations listed. So I think I was able to follow a little bit as you were talking. My question, I think maybe I have severe lack of caffeine at this end, but I'm trying to sort out some of the things that you said. And there are two that I'm trying to understand. There is a point where you said, a point in your talk where you said, there is no real koinonia between soul and body. It is because they are so heterogeneous between each other. So it is fragile. If there is unity, it is fragile and impermanent. Then I was thinking about earlier when you were laying out one of the definitions of koinonia, it is a sort of communion. This I think is from Phaedo 100d6, some sort of communion between the sensible and ideas. And I was kind of thinking in the back of my head, given what you are saying, that there is no true koinonia between soul and body, yet we know that for Socrates, sensibles come by way of the physical, the body. So I'm wondering, what is, if you could say a little bit more, well, how do you understand this communion between sensibles and ideas, given that there can be no true koinonia between body and soul?
Thank you for your question. Well, I think that the two issues should be somehow considered, separately, because the communion, so to speak, between soul and body is a problem which regards particularly the possibility for the soul to contemplate the intelligible entities. Because as is well known in the Phaedo, we are told that the soul is somehow taken from the thorough and a perfect contemplation of the intelligible due to the body. So they are not. It is a dualism. the one which characterizes the relationship between soul and body. Whereas I do believe that between the sensible entities and intelligible entities, some kind of koinonia there should be some kind of koinonia between them, even though it is not a koinonia. That should be considered in physical terms, of course. It is not a sort of a mixture as a doctors, for example, would take it to be, but some kind of relationship, though an asymmetrical relationship, as some scholars believe it to be. I think that such kind of koinonia is at place, is possible to be found. I mean, in the dialogues at work. So I don't know if I've answered your question, which was quite difficult. So, I hope I've answered properly.
As I said, it's a little half-baked. I think I need another cup of coffee. But thank you. What you said was helpful.
Wonderful. So we still have time if there is one more question or comment or reaction. Let me see. No. So if not, I think we can thank again Carlo for this presentation. And as we are right on time, we can go to the second speaker of the day, which is Anna Marmodoro. Again, sorry for the accent, from Durham University, and the title of her talk is Plural Partaking. You have 30 minutes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't get myself unmuted. I want to say thank you, Luca, and thank you everyone for being here. It's great to see a number of friends and colleagues and meet new people. I wish we were in person, but such is life at the moment. So my talk bears on the issue of koinonia in relation to a philosophical problem that Plato, I think, has an answer to. So here is the problem. Take a relational statement, such as, for example, Socrates is Plato's teacher, honey is sweeter than milk, this stone is equal in size to that stone, to the other stone, and so on and so forth. Just think of relational statements and then ask yourself the question, what is it in the ontology that makes a relational statement true? What is the truth maker of a relational statement? Now, the interesting point is that we, modern philosophers, I think, have a fundamentally different approach to this question from the ancients. And our modern approach has been very much influenced by the fact that we are all grandchildren of Russell. We, modern, by and large, believe in what I call here on my slide relational realism. So a relational statement is made true by the existence in the ontology of a relational entity. There is something relational in the ontology that explains the relational way we speak about the world. And this relational entity in the ontology by modern philosophers is posited to be a polyadic property, so a property that works like a function with multiple places. Now, in contrast to this modern approach, I claim that the ancients thought very differently. They admit, of course, relational ways of speaking, but they do not admit relations in their ontology. So this is something I worked on in three of my favorite ancient philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, and Anaxagoras. And here I'm going to concentrate on the answer that Plato gives to this question of what makes true relational statements. And I'm going to argue that he has a solution for that that doesn't involve anything like relational realism. Plato's ontology, as it is familiar to all of you here, has a very economical, if you want, a very parsimonious toolkit. So there are individuals, which are the objects in the world, there are the forms, and then there is partaking, or what I call, is also called participation. I want to show in this talk, although very briefly, that contrary what can be taken to be scholarly or orthodoxy, including, for example, recent work by Matthew Duncombe, Plato can account for what we would call relational statements without positing any relation in his ontology. He does not need the relations. He can explain everything just by means of these three types of entities: individuals, forms, and partaking or participation. Now, the key to this is the nature of partaking and or participation, which is, of course, the holy grail for scholars interested in Plato's metaphysics. Now, I argue that Plato uses partaking or participation as the metaphysical tool in his system, the tool by means of which he can do a lot of things in the ontology. And that's why I think his ontology is so parsimonious. If we, with participation, Plato can explain the qualification of objects, such as this book is red, for example, but also what we posit as relations between objects. So milk is sweeter than, honey is sweeter than milk. Plato can do all of that with participation if I claim we understand participation in Plato's metaphysics as a development of the type of partaking or participation that Anaxagoras had posited in his own metaphysics. And that is, of course, the controversial claim I'm going to make, and that is, I have very little time to defend here, but I can also refer you to the longer version of the argument, which is in my book on Anaxagoras metaphysics. So I'm going to lean on the arguments of that book here, and I'm going to super briefly summarize them here. I submit that Anaxagoras is the first to introduce the metaphysics of participation, intending or understanding participation as partaking by parts, as the mechanism that explains how things in the world are qualified by certain properties. So an object in the world has a certain property when that object, according to Anaxagoras, has within its own constitution a part of the property itself. And that is why participation is I call it partaking by parts. Something is hot by having literally a part of the property hot in it. And this means that objects and properties overlap constitutionally, namely they have common parts. An object that is hot has within its own constitution a part of the property being hot, which means that the part of the property and the part of the object are shared. Now, of course, as I said, this is a controversial claim, which I'm not defending here, and I'm just putting to you as my backdrop that Plato conceives participation in the way Anaxagoras did, or at least Plato before the Timaeus. With participation understood this way, I claim Plato can account for what we call relational statements without positing what we would call relations and understand as polyadic properties. Now, of course, you want to know how. What Plato does, among other things, is enrich the account of participation already given by Anaxagoras by introducing the fact that not only objects partake in forms individually, so this object is hot because it partakes of the form of heat, but also objects can partake in forms plurally. And that is going to be the key for explaining how Plato can account for relational statements without positing relations. Now, the identification of plural partaking is the original interpretation of Plato that I'm going to spend a little bit of time on here in this talk. So objects can partake in forms plurally, and forms can partake in forms plurally, as we'll see. Now, take a standard case of a multiplicity of objects qualified in a certain way. The chairs in this room are brown because each of the chairs is brown. Now contrast this standard example with a special example that Plato gives. Socrates and Hippias are two, although neither of them is two. So we want to know, how is it that Socrates and Hippias are two, since neither of the two is two? We have a pair of objects, neither of which is the bearer of the property, but the two together are two. Who is it that possesses two-ness? It's not the case that Socrates and Hippias together become one subject, because if they became one subject, then there would not be two, but just one. So it's a really interesting challenge that Plato raises, and I think he's going to give us the insight into how Plato understands relational statements. So as Plato discusses the case of Socrates and Hippias being two in the Hippias Major, he presents them as jointly qualified as two. So Hippias is not two, Socrates is not two, but Hippias and Socrates jointly, i.e. together, are two. Being together two is not becoming one subject, but is also not bearing the property individually. Now, in the Hippias Major, we don't get an ontology for this special case, but we do get a bit more in the Phaedo. In the Phaedo, Plato returns to the example of being two and explains the joint qualification in the standard way in which he explains normally how objects in the world are qualified by a property. He says there is no other cause of the existence of things that are two other than partaking in duality, and things which are to be two must participate in duality, and whatever it is to be one must participate in unity. So Plato is giving us a clue for understanding joint qualification. He says, as much as things individually have a certain property because they partake in a form, so things also jointly have a property because they partake in a form. But how is it that they partake in a form? Well, as I say, it has to be a different way from the way in which things individually partake in a form, because it's impossible for Socrates and Hippias to partake individually in the form of duality. So let's now put to use the interpretation that I gave you very quickly. If we understand participation as having a part of a property along the lines of Plato's developing Anaxagoras theory of participation, then an object is F when that object has a part of form F within its constitution. That's my claim. In this case that we are examining, Socrates and Hippias are two, not because each has a part of duality on his own, but because they jointly have a part of duality, which makes them two. So this means that we have two individuals, Socrates and Plato, who have a part of a form in common. So it is as if the individual Socrates and the individual Hippias overlap with each other constitutionally because they share a part in common, and that part that is shared is a part of the form of duality. Is that sharing a part of duality that makes the two of them together two on the interpretation that I'm proposing. So to be two is a joint qualification, is something that individuals have only together, and it results from their joint partaking, which is a type of plural partaking. Plural partaking is an innovation that Plato introduces to develop further what I think is the original theory of participation of Anaxagoras. But now what we want to do is to put to use this idea of joint partaking to explain what I think are putative relations in Plato's ontology. Now let's move to a different example, from that of being two to the example of being equal. The claim that I want to put to your consideration is that Plato treats being equal, which is taken to be a relational statement, usually underpinned by a relation. I want to say Plato treats that property of being equal just as he treats the property of being two. So he would explain things being equal to one another by thinking of them as being equal together with one another, like being two. So like Socrates and Hippias are two only together because they jointly partake of duality. In the same way, two things in the world that are equal together because they partake in the form of equality, which means that they have in common a part of equality. And if this sound interpretation of Plato, then you can see that Plato can explain situations like this stone is equal to that stone without having to posit any extra entity in the ontology, without having to posit relations or polyadic properties. It just needs to introduce this new type of partaking, which is joint or plural partaking as opposed to individual partaking. And here I'm not able, for reasons of time, to give you the full argumentation. And in fact, the whole presentation I'm going to make today is going to be just a sketch of ideas. But if you can see the transition from being two to being equal, and if you can see the soundness of the interpretation that I'm offering for being equal, then you can follow me in the next step I want to take, which is generalizing this account of relations, putative relations like being equal, as explained all by Plato with his idea of plural partaking. So I want to say that Plato thinks of all symmetric relations, or what we would call symmetric relations, along the lines of plural partaking of multiple individuals in one and the same form. In the case of being equal, is the form of equality. And this is extremely interesting philosophically because it gives us a way of conceptualizing relations, as we call them, as joint qualifications explained by plural partaking. So it's a really interesting move philosophically because it tells us something that we have not thought about, we have not thought about, as to how to explain relational statements without adding anything to the ontology, but just exploiting the resources that participation gives us. Now, of course, the story is more complex than that because we know that in addition to what we classify as symmetric relations, such as being equal to, there are also what Kitfine and others have called asymmetric relations. So asymmetric relations do not qualify the two putative relata in the same way, they qualify them differently. The typical example in modern philosophy is John loves Mary, or Abelard loves Eloise, but Eloise does not love Abelard. Or to use a more Platonic example, Socrates is larger than Simmias because of their respective sizes. So we modern think of this kind of relational statement as underpinned by asymmetric relations, and we find very difficult to explain what asymmetric relations are. Now, I want to say that Plato was aware of the existence of what we classify as asymmetric relations. Of course, he did not call them that way. He did not explicitly differentiate them from symmetric relations, but he has examples in his dialogues of asymmetric relations, such as being larger or taller than. And my argument is that Plato explains them too as a case of plural partaking. So basically, I'm saying that Plato extends the idea of plural partaking from the case of properties like being two, to the case of properties like being equal, to the case of properties like being larger than. And that is the point I want to make about the parsimony of Plato's ontology. One tool only, which is participation, understood as sharing parts of the form, Plato can do a lot with a great explanatory power. Now, yes, asymmetric relations, such as being larger than, are cases of plural partaking, at least on the reading that I want to propose to you, but they are not, but they're also different from the cases that we have seen before. And now what I want to talk a little bit about is the difference. And the difference is going to be what differentiates symmetric from asymmetric relational statements. So in which way are asymmetric relational statements explained by Plato in terms of plural partaking? Plato, and here we come closer to the topic of this meeting of the society, undertakes this challenge of explaining asymmetric relations by enriching his ontology, especially in the Sophist, with an extra tier of forms, the so-called great kinds, and a further type of partaking, which is going to be the partaking of forms in forms. And by means of this enrichment of his ontology, he's going to be able to do two things. So he's going to be able to handle the cases of like being larger than, in terms of two distinct sets of qualifications and partakings. So when Socrates is larger than Simmias, for Plato, we have to explain how the forms of the large and of the small are qualified as opposites, so they are opposite properties, and then we have the individuals, Simmias and Socrates, as qualified by these two opposites respectively. So there is a lot to be explained in this picture. Socrates and Simmias are one larger than the other, which is to be grounded in the qualification of the form of large and the form of small as opposite properties, plus the qualification of the objects in the world as qualified respectively by each of these two opposites. And as I say, here is where Koinonia enters the picture. So again, very, very briefly, in the Sophist, we have this innovation of Plato introducing an extra tier of forms, the so-called great kinds, and a new type of partaking for general or even universal qualifications such as difference, sameness, necessity, and so on and so forth. I call this extra type of qualification of partaking permeation, but the name doesn't matter so much for present purposes. The point is that permeation is that type of partaking of forms in forms. And here I give you a snippet of the Sophist where Plato talks about some of the classes will mingle with one another and others will not. And some will mingle with a few and others with many. And there is nothing to hinder some from mingling universally with all. So here is Koinonia in the sense that Carlo was talking about under the heading 7 in his handout, is partaking of forms in forms. Why does Plato need it, and how does it serve its purpose of explaining what we posit as asymmetric relations? Here is a very quick illustration, and I apologize, every argument that I'm giving you is just a sketch here. So Plato has the forms of the large and the form of the small, which are forms that are part of his ontology, even before, of course, the Sophist, as being jointly partaking of the great kind of being opposites. And then these two forms that jointly partake in the great kind of being opposites are also partaken by the individuals, Socrates and Simmias. So here you see in my PowerPoint is rough sketch. Simmias partakes of, Simmias partakes of the large, and Socrates partakes of the small. But Simmias and Socrates partakes respectively of the large and the small, not independently from one another, but somehow together with one another or in parallel with one another. And what is it that guarantees that the two partake in parallel of these respective forms? Well, this is guaranteed by the fact that the form of the large and the form of the small are permeated by the great kind of being opposites. So the upper level here, partaking of the forms in the great kind is what guarantees that at the lower level, the individuals partaking in the large and in the small partake in the large and in the small in parallel with each other, which is another way of saying together with one another, which is another way of saying they partake plurally of their forms. Now, as much as the koinonia, which is the intermingling of the forms, is helpful for Plato because it gives us, it gives him a way of explaining what we posit as asymmetric relations. It's a koinonia of all forms is also problematic within Plato's ontology because it generates combinations of partakings of the forms in forms and individuals in forms that get to such a degree of complexity that the account loses explanatory power. So I think koinonia, as I see it, of forms in forms is basically a tool, a type of partaking that Plato uses, introduces and uses for certain purposes, and it is useful for Plato for certain purposes, but it's also a tool that is costly for Plato to introduce, and the cost lies in the explanatory complexity that koinonia introduces. And that's why after the Sophist, Plato will move to a different account in the Timaeus, which I have no time to go into here, but that is a step forward and a step away from the koinonia of the Sophist. So here I will very, very briefly draw some conclusions, recapitulating the argument that I've tried to sketch. And I emphasize, I'm sorry, it's only a very quick sketch for reasons of time. So I am interested here today in talking about how Plato can offer an account of relational statements without introducing any extra entity in his ontology, and particularly without introducing what we posit as relations or polyadic properties. Plato can do this in a parsimonious way in his system by conceptualizing what we consider relations as plural qualifications. Plural qualifications are explained by Plato in his usual way as individual qualifications. So if individual qualifications are cases where the individual partakes in a form by having a part of the form, plural qualifications are cases where two or more individuals jointly, i.e. plurally, partake in a form by sharing a part. Now, this way, Plato can explain symmetric cases, such as being equal, but also asymmetric cases like being larger, only that for the asymmetric cases, he has to introduce a bit more baggage, i.e. the great kinds and the participation of forms in forms. But there is a philosophical intuition that we see in play there, and that can be useful for us too, given that the metaphysics of relations is one of the hardest issues in contemporary discussions in metaphysics. So I'll stop here to leave time for taking questions, but if the arguments are too brief, or if you're curious to hear a bit, to read a bit more about my thinking about this topic, Forms and Structure in Plato's Metaphysics is forthcoming soon. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much for this talk. So we have indeed 15 minutes for the discussion and questions. Again, any question, you just have to put your hand up and it will appear here in my screen. And so let's see. So first question is Carolina, please.
Hi, Carolina. Very good to meet you, at least online. Hi.
Thank you for this, Anna. It was very interesting and very clear. I just want to ask for a clarification. So, who are the entities that can plural partake? Are these individuals, or we need sets there? So it is the set Simmias and Socrates that partake in equality. It is this, because in your latter example, then if Socrates partake in the form of small and Simmias partake in this form of the large, then it seems that it's the set, and then we have another entity, and it's not that simple. So thank you.
Carolina, this is actually a very clever question. I think it's a very good question, and it's a bit of a challenge for Plato. So let me say briefly, I do not think that Plato has any extra entities such as sets, but there is the fact that Hippias and Socrates together are two, and this stone and this stone together are equal, and then Simmias and Socrates together are such that one is larger than the other. So that togetherness is not ontologized, not reified by Plato in anything extra. And then if you ask me, so what's it that grounds that togetherness? It's a problem that has exercised me too. And I think for Plato is almost like an empirical fact. So there are things in the world that we speak about as in a relational way. And then what is this, the economically, the metaphysically most economical way to explain it? Well, by thinking that they partake plurally. And then you say, well, what does it mean to say that they partake plurally? They partake together instead of individually. And I think at that point, we have reached the rock bottom of what Plato tells us about plural participation. And that is why, we may have further questions, but then I think it would not be helpful for Plato to say, well, let's add sex, because that would be a further entity to be further explained. So, you know, if you want, we can put it this way: by charity, I think we should stop there, you know, and take what is good about this account of relational statements with the awareness that there is something more that one might want to be said, but it's not there in Plato. It was a clever question, Carolina, though. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. We have 4 questions at the time being, and the next one is from Christophe.
Hi, Christophe. Yeah.
Hi. Not very nice to get to know you. Would have been great to be in Lima together. One question, maybe thank you very much for this very interesting approach. Maybe I didn't get one point, and so I apologize in advance, but my question would be, what is your idea of the role of the judging subject in that constellation that you sketched? Because in a sense, it seems to me that the subject that more or less is judging Socrates is larger than Simmias, more or less is choosing and assembling 2 entities in the world that are doing the plural partaking as you described it. And if we think of a third person, let's say Phaedo is even greater, and you are looking at Phaedo and Socrates and saying Socrates is smaller than Phaedo, and I'm looking at Simmias and Socrates and I'm saying Socrates is larger than Simmias, are we then, I don't know, as judging subjects influencing the plural partaking, so to speak, in a very rough sense? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Christophe. I think that these are objective relational statements, as it were. So they're not subjective, as like, you know, you look at Socrates and Simmias and it seems to you that Socrates is taller than Simmias, or I look at them and it seems to me vice versa. I think Plato is here grounding these relational statements on the individual sizes of the objects under consideration. So I don't think in this picture there is a judging subject. I have not found evidence that Plato is thinking there is a judging subject. But of course, you can take together, there can be togetherness between different individuals. So you and me, and I don't know, you and me and Luca, and, you know, maybe I'm taller than Luca, but you are taller than me. But this is grounded in the size that each of us has, and is not subjectively judged by a third entity, as you put it, if that helps.
Okay, I would have some sequence, but maybe I write it.
Sure. So well, maybe I can say it's not about what we would call secondary qualities. It's not about the response dependence on a judging subject, at least for the cases that I'm looking at. It would be interesting to think about shades of color, for example, but we'll leave it at that for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Tom.
Hello, Tom.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. I enjoyed the talk very much. I really appreciate this, the power of the idea of overlap, ontological overlap between the 2 things that we would say are related, right? But so I'm just wondering about how parsimonious this really is. Because if you just think the classical Russellian thing is, they're not extra relations. They're just properties. Some are polyadic and some are monadic.
Yeah.
And someone might say, on your account, well, there are forms. Some are polyadic and so, you know, like equal, and some are monadic, like beautiful or whatever, being a tree. I mean, so I mean, I can see that, okay, but now we have like 2 different kinds of forms. So, I mean, so making a distinction there. So, I mean, maybe that's not.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is a totally fair point, Tom. I appreciate that you raise it, because there is something I didn't say today, that is that I think there are reasons for specifically rejecting polyadic properties and therefore equivalently relational forms. And my reason is this: I just think there is something funny about polyadic properties, because they're supposed to be multitasking. So they're supposed to qualify something in a certain way, but also relate it to something else. And that is something mysterious to me that has not been, I think, explained by those who posit polyadic properties. So it's not just the economy of having fewer entities in the ontologies, that the addition of polyadic properties and equivalently relational forms seems problematic. It's like, being the father of, is supposed to be a property that, let's say, qualified you as father, but also your son as the son of you as you know, and that is what is strange, you know, it's properties whose essence is quite mysterious to me.
Yeah, thanks. That additional philosophical gain makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, I really feel that I gave only a very brief sketch, but it was an opportunity to just throw some ideas and get feedback. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Edward.
Hello, Ed.
Hi. Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting paper. Well, let me just note, you alluded to the Hippias major when you talked about the two, and it's an argument for separate forms, and it's, you know, there's the two can't belong to either Socrates or Hippias, so it's got to be separate. And now your approach is to turn that around and to understand that as actually a way of talking about participation. And it seems to me, I mean, that's very interesting in itself, but it seems to me that it's really a big problem. And it's treated in the Phaedo, as you also mentioned. But one thing you left out that makes your account a little less parsimonious than you're saying is he talks about the forms in us. It's not just large and small. There's a largeness in Cebes and a largeness in Socrates, and there's some sort of a degree. So what looks to be a relation turns out to be a kind of separate existence of a separate participation rather than a joint participation. You don't get a larger than here. You get it equal. It's like equal as if you kind of broke it up and put equal in one stick and another equal in another stick.
Yep.
Larger than turns out to be large in one character, and there's a little bit less largeness, and then there are also smallness, and then there's a whole song and dance there that's pretty complicated and pretty unintuitive.
Yeah, no, that's fair, Ed. I mean, again, you know, I can only say that I had to leave out a lot from this talk, and here, you know, a premise that I'm making is that participation.
You're going to tell me I need to read your book.
Sorry, no. I mean, well, no. Sorry, no. Fair enough. Sorry, I want to say that very briefly that I understand participation pre-Timaeus as literally having parts of the form, and I understand participation in an Anaxagorean way. So more or less is having parts, more parts or fewer parts. Anaxagoras would say. I think part of it is inherited by Plato. So it's absolutely fair what you're saying, that there is more to be said. But it's part of the story that I couldn't give today. So, you know, yes, in a way I want to say, do read the book, but we can also talk about it without you having to read the book.
Okay, well, I'll stop then.
Okay, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
But fair enough. I mean, definitely there was more to be said.
Thank you. The next question is Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Hello. Thank you. Yeah, Anna, that was really, really interesting. And I know that we share intuitions about some of these topics. So I just wondered if participation is on this view a kind of qualifying exercise or whatever, I just wondered why not think of qualifier and qualifyee as being in a relation? Like a letter writer, a letter of reference writer, and the person they're writing it for.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is the same I gave Tom earlier on. I think that there are reasons for I think there are reasons for rejecting positive relations, and these reasons are philosophical and they're not specific to Plato. I think that there are difficulties that the ancient can simply avoid by not having relational properties, polyadic properties, or relational forms, Plato would say, in their ontology. And so, you know, there is a reason against positing relations, and then there is also an advantage in not positing relations, that is that the ontology is more parsimonious. So in a sense, I think Tom's question was really in the same direction as yours. Why is it that I think that it's better for the ancients not having relations? Because it's just not only adding more, but adding something that is problematic to explain. And I think we have inherited this riddle of relations just by being, grandchildren of Russell, and we should not read it into the ancients, because the ancients did not have it. And it's really interesting how they could handle this idea of relational statements, which are very intuitive, in ontologically sounder ways that I think we can handle today, things like asymmetric relations.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. There are still 2 minutes, so if there is another question, or if someone else wants to make a follow-up or something, we still have, yes, 2 minutes. So let's see if, yes. Is there let me see.
May I?
Yes, of course.
Please.
So this comes from the category of very simple-minded questions, and it may in fact pick up on what Tom said, or excuse me, Carolina said at the beginning. Perhaps it's my Russellian indoctrination that keeps me from that forces me to see plural participation as a relationship between the two individuals participating. There seems to be some relationship between Simmias and Socrates already at work, which allows them to plug into the respective forms.
Yes, Richard, if I may, as I said, I think it's a fair point that you and Carolina are raising, and I think I can answer at least specifically in relation to the case of Simmias and Socrates by saying that I think that is precisely the role of Koinonia as intermingling of forms. So it is the forms of the large and the form and of the small that jointly partake in the great kinds, let's say, of being opposites. And this is why then the individuals who individually partake in each of the forms partake in them in parallel, as I say, or, together, if you want to put it this way. So it's not that the individuals in the world are held together by a relationship. It's just that the very fact that they partake each in the form of large and small, and the forms of large and small jointly partake in the great kind, that explains why it is this pair, Socrates and Simmias, that are one larger than the other.
Okay.
So now, of course, you could tell me, well, Plato is just moving the problem up at the level of the forms partaking jointly in a great kind. And in a sense, I want to recognize that. And that's why I think after the Sophist, Plato really rethinks all this issue of plural partaking. And then we have several innovations in the Timaeus. So it's not that I want to sell Plato as having all solutions. I just think that there is something really interesting in his approach that should be brought out and explained a bit more than what happens in current scholarship, where everybody just thinks, fine, there are relational forms as much as we have polyadic properties or relations. I want to say, no, Plato is just different from us. There's something really interesting to say. It's intuitively, there is a philosophical intuition that is worth exploring. Maybe it's not a complete account, it's not, but again, do we have a complete account of relations? Not really. And so that's where, I want to commend Plato's as at least being an alternative to be explored.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we can thank you again, Anna, for the presentation and everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
For the lively discussion. So we shall move now with our third and last speaker of this session, which is Yu-Jung from the University Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne. And the title of her talk is The Communing Power of Being and the Communion of Kinds in Plato's Sophist.
Thank you. I want to first thank the organizer for having this conference. Can you hear me, everyone? Yes, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me try to share my screen. Is it working? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So okay. So thank you everyone for assisting to my presentation. My paper is quite long, so I will start right away. I have this impression that I'm going to say something opposite from the previous presentation, but we'll see. Well, okay. Since my paper is a bit too long, so I have all the text here in the handout. I will refer to them, but I won't read the text. I won't read each of one of them. Okay, so I will just start. So in the Sophist at 247d, in the middle of the fictional debate on the definition of being, we can find this passage where the stranger says, this is T1, I said that anything that has by nature any power at all, whether to act on some other thing or to be affected by the most meager thing in even the smallest way, even if only once, every such thing really is, for I laid it down as a horos of being that it is nothing other than power. I use the translation of Marie-Louise Gill. The aim is to find out whether Plato proposed a new definition of being, whether it is simply a criterion that lays out the necessary condition of being, or whether it is a provisional and not representative of his thought. So numerous commentators have already pointed out that the presence of the uses of the term horos and horizon here do not necessarily means definitions. But they also agrees that the Greek here is not sufficient to settle the question of whether Plato holds this definition or not. So the interpretation of this so-called dunamis proposal can be grouped into three. The first, the dunamis proposal is provisional and does not represent Plato's view. Second, the dunamis proposal says what Plato really thinks, but it's not a definition and only a criterion. This is the Leslie Brown's position. And third, dunamis proposal is a true definition of being for Plato. And this is the position of Fiona Ley, Francesca Fontaroda, and Marie-Louise Gill. So this paper aims to show that the current interpretation supporting the dunamis proposal as an essential definition of being presuppose the presence of something other than power to secure an essence of each being. As a result, these readings only demonstrate the fact that being has power instead of being is power. Another objective of this paper is to defend the strong formulation of the dunamis proposal, which is that being is nothing other than power. To defend this position, I will first point out an absolute discontinuity between knowing about one thing and knowing one thing in itself and by itself in current interpretation, and notably in Ley, Fontaroda, and Gill's reading. That is, we cannot know what a kind is in itself and by itself by going through a process of knowing something about it. So this discontinuity introduces an obstacle to the knowledge that dialectics can produce. Second, I will argue that the dunamis proposal is introduced out of a need for knowing something by relation, and at the same time, we can still know something in itself and by itself. This need cannot be satisfied by other accounts of being proposed in the Sophist. Finally, I will explain how the power of being enables the kind to commune in such a way that we can divide kind by kind, katakene, diahastai, by perceiving different types of one and many relation out of the communion of kinds. So in the first part, I will quickly review Ley, Fontaroda, and Gill's reading to clarify what I have just pointed out, namely the absolute discontinuity between knowing about one thing and knowing one thing in itself and by itself. Ley and Fontaroda's interpretation share a structural similarity, and they mobilize very similar arguments. They both consider the power of being as that of establishing a relation of participation with another being. Though For Lei, a being manifests its active power and acts on something when it is the property that causes a subject to possess this property. So for Lei, the power of being is a causal power. For Fronterota, it is actually the opposite. That is, the active power of being enables a being to participate in the form. These two readings are opposite but very similar, because they both identify the power of being with the power to establish a relation of participation. In other words, the operation of such power of being always results in a relation that makes one side a subject and the other side a quality. Jill's reading is slightly different, although she also identifies the vowel kind that gives other kinds the power to associate mutually with each other as the kind being, the kind responsible to the division, the kind difference, but she argues that the kind sameness as a vowel kind, as a relational kind, secures the identity of each being so that every being is identical to itself. Structurally speaking, these three readings are considered that the power of being is the power to associate, so it is the power that makes predication possible, and it is the power of the kind difference that differentiates one kind from another. And the kind sameness, whether it is relational or not, ensures that all being is identical to itself in a repetitive sense of A equals A. So in other words, the power that defines being mentioned at T1, the 247D here, is identified as the power mentioned in T2, the kind that runs through all of them and hold them together to make them capable of associating, and then identified as the kind being among the 5 megasagene at 254, that this is T3. So this interpretation has two consequences. First, if being is the power to participate and to be participated in, then a definite being is defined by all its relation of participation, both as a subject that participates and a quality that is participated in by others. So the being of Socrates, for example, is defined by its power to participate in, for example, human being, intelligent, man, tall, and so on. Nonetheless, in this sense, the power of a being to participate in essential quality and non-essential quality will be indiscernible. And thus, being, in this case, is completely confused with essence. This is probably the reason why Jews emphasizes the importance of the kind sameness that guarantees the strict identity of a kind to itself. That is, a being must always be identical to what it is. What is not exactly clear here is, for example, in Socrates' being, as well as through the operation of sameness, Socrates is identical to himself in the sense of being identical to Socrates, or whether his being remains identical to what it is in itself and by itself, well, for example, to human being. If it is a latter, the being of something appears to be distinct to its essence, since it is the sameness that enables each being to remain identical to its essence, while the kind being enables them to associate with other properties or subjects. So Jill's reading may be exempt from the first consequence of the confusion between being and essence, but not from the second one. The second consequence can be summed up as the dysfunction of dialectics because of a type of communion of kinds that these readings imply. If we agree that the vowel kinds are the only kinds that generate bonds, then all relation amongst being must come from the relation established by the vowel kinds. According to a reading on the discussion, the kind being associates in the sense of establishing a relation of participation, the kind difference differentiates, and the kind sameness, if one considers it as a vowel kind as Jill does, identifies one being with itself. The communion of kinds in this sense is centered by kind as a subject that links individually to its qualities. For example, figure is linked individually to square, triangle, angle, limits, plane, and so on. And the only relation between kind as qualities is different. So the kind being enables these individual association, and they are individually associated with the subject kind for no other reason than the being of the subject kind. In other words, figure is square, triangle, angle, plane, limit, and so on, because the being of the figure has such power. And it has such power because it is the being of the figure. So it is not like the kind difference, which establishes relations between one, because one is different from the other. The kind being associates for no other reason than that it is being of the subject, of this particular subject. The consequence of this is that the kind being only establishes individual relation between a kind as subject and a kind as quality. And therefore, as qualities of the same subject kind, they share nothing other than difference. As a result, all relations are subordinate to a subject, since the being of the subject is the only reason for having such relation. Thus, to know its relation to others, we need to already know the subject itself. This means that it is impossible to know something about one thing without already knowing that thing in itself and by itself. The impossibility of knowing one thing by its relation to another without knowing the thing in itself and by itself introduces a serious obstacle in the process of acquiring knowledge, because it means that we either know the totality of a being or nothing about it, because we cannot know something about it. This causes a rupture between knowing about something and knowing it in itself and by itself, since no possible continuity can be established from the individual participative relation to the organization of kinds that together capture the essence of the subject. The key problem with such a reading is that it considers the kind being to be the cause of the association, and it obliges the relation of a participation to be understood directly as the relation between a subject and a quality, or a subject and predicate, if you like, rather than considering the participation as something that can be translated into a subject-predicate relation without really being it. I would love to show you how the problem of relation, but not predication, is the central question in the Sophist. But unfortunately, I would not have enough time, so I just want to show you briefly a list. And I can only provide a very brief summary here for the argument. We can come back here for a question. This is a list that, it's a very short list, not complete at all. The idea is just to show you that there is a lot of relational terms in the first part of the Sophist, and the problem of attribution one thing to another is really in the center of the Sophist. So the falsehood was impossible at first in the Sophist, because it necessitates the attribution of the characteristic of being to non-being. And according to Parmenides' doctrine, we must not bring or stay on non-being upon AP being. This is Sophist 237c8. The validity of the stranger's argument on the paradox of falsehood presupposes one thing. If A is related to B, then A is identical to B, then A is B. If A is not related to B, so A is not B, then A is irrelevant to B and to everything about B. It was at this stage impossible to conceive how A being attached to B without being identical to B. because the relation as a third thing in between is not taken into account. Moreover, it does not have a place in being. This is the pretext of the inquiry of being, since they all, this is the pretext of the inquiry on being, and all four position fails to include the being of relation into their account of being, since they all fail to explain how, according to their definition of being, one thing can be attached to its negation. So here is a summary of the argument, but I won't go through them. So the idea is actually to show that all definition define being by a certain quantity and or a certain quality will fail to include relation into being. So the dynamist proposal represents a different approach. It defines being as something that is in itself neither a quantity nor a quality. It can only be quantified and qualified according to how it communes. In the Republic, dunamis is defined as, this is text 7, dunamis is defined as that by virtue of which we can do what we can do. Aiste kai hemes dynamita ha dynamita. This is Republic 477 C2. So power is, according to this definition, a third thing that can put two things into a relation. In this sense, power is by nature relational. And what it is can be defined by how it enables the communing, as we can see in T8 here in this sentence. So the dunamis is therefore a being in between a metaxu, since the power is always the thing by virtue of which one thing put itself into relation with another and produce an effect from the liaison. In other words, a power is always a communing power, and what it differentiates one power from another consists in the thing with which, at full, it establishes a communion and the effect it produced from such a communion. Many scholars have already pointed out that the power to act and to be acted upon in the Sophist 247, this is the text 1, yes, here. The power to act and be acted upon here in the Sophist in the T1 is essentially the power to commune, as we can see in T9. Okay, I'm sorry. Here in 248, 251, 252, 254, we can see a mixed usage of dunamis and Koinonia. So the Sophists seem to confirm the definition of power of dunamis in the Republic. It seeks to articulate the power of being by exercising with a certain science to differentiate which kinds commute mutually and which keep each other separate. Then this is, or we can go back to T2 here. So this is the passage where he said that we are searching for the kind that runs through all of them and hold them together and make them capable of associating, and also the kind responsible for the division. So in this text, the Strangers distinguishes 3 steps. First, the kind that harmonize symphony mutually and those that do not. Second, the kind that brings others together so that they are capable of mixing. And third, the kind that are responsible for the division in general. Both association and division here are power. By virtue of the kind that gives being the power to associate, one can unite with another and form a continuum and syneces. And by virtue of the kind that is responsible for the division, one remains separate from another. There is therefore no reason to consider the power of being simply as the power to associate, Rather, both power to associate and power to divide belongs to the communing part of being, and both this association and division put being into relation. This is why I argue that the kind being is not the kind that associates, but the kind by which all beings can associate and divide. Or in other words, the kind being is by which all beings participate in sameness and difference. And sameness is the vowel kind that associates one thing with what is in relation to itself. Sameness, for a scholar, is always considered as that which guarantees one thing to be identical to itself in the sense of A equals A. And this is the reason why scholars like Dixot believes that the kind sameness is not the vowel kind because it cannot be relational. The passage that commentators refers to attempting to prove that the kind sameness make each being identical to itself in the sense of A equals A is at 256a10, and this is text 10 here. When the stranger says, change is the same because it participates in sameness in regards to itself, pros heao 10. Traditionally, scholars have taken this to be the proof that the kind sameness is not relational, since it identifies one thing to itself. However, Joe uses the same phrase to argue that the kind sameness is relational because it relates one thing to itself, and the pros heao is a kind of pros t. But although she thinks that the sameness is a relational kind, the outcome of this aligns with the position of other commentators, namely that the kind sameness make one thing identical to itself in the sense of A equals A. So the result is the same. Where the same term is repeated, I will argue that the kind sameness is relational, as Joe states, and it puts one thing in relation to itself, but not in a repetitive form of identity. There is nothing in the Sophist to suggest that when Plato used the word tauton, he means the absolute identity. On the contrary, you can find many cases where tauton is employed to question how multiple terms are combined to discuss the same thing. And it is even clearer in the Parmenides, in the dialogue Parmenides, where the term tauton is not only relational, but also implies multiplicity. As Parmenides says it at 139d 1-5, it is not the case that whenever a thing comes to be the same as something, tauton to t, it comes to be one. So the expression tauton to t, one thing being same as something, implies the presence of two terms joined by the sameness. Even when the two terms have the same reference, they are discernible, just as 1 plus 1 and 2 are identical but discernible. Also, the expression that Plato used to describe a strict self-identity is not tauton, but katatauta kai hosautos, an expression that we often find in passage where the author insists that the intelligible form is identical to itself. So if the forms are always the same in the same way, so katatauta kai hosautos, it may be argued that it is possible for something that is not a form to be the same, but not always in the same way. For example, Socrates can be the same as man in a specific way, so that the term Socrates and man refer to the same thing. Hence, in a certain sense, Socrates is identical to man in relation to what he is, but Socrates is not identical to man in the absolute. Let us return to the phrase in the Sophist where change is said to be the same and not the same. So the T10 here. Change is said to be the same because it participates in sameness with regard to itself. First, heao 10. Change is not the same simply because it participates in sameness. It is the same because between one thing and what it is in relation to itself, there is necessary a relation of sameness that connects them as referring to the same thing. Therefore, a being as being necessarily participates in sameness. In other words, the expression proseauten or proseauto does not indicate what the subject is in itself or and by itself, but what is about it. The association between kinds is the result of a certain sameness they share. So we can know about something by its relation to itself without knowing it in itself and by itself. For instance, a triangle is a figure. So we know something about a triangle itself because a triangle is a figure in the sense of being identical to a figure in a certain way, while at the same time being different from a figure. So being in general, therefore, is the power to associate and to divide. And each specific being, by being what it is the power to associate with and divide itself from specific kinds. Since sameness associates one kind with another, the communion of kinds does not present a set of individual relations between a particular subject and all its predicates. But if being associate mutually through sameness in the sense that they share some same thing, this relation of sameness is not subordinate to a specific being because it only indicates a sameness between two terms that makes one identical to the other in a specific way. But how can we get to the essence of one being given this relative sameness? Let us take Plato's example in the Meno. This is the text 11, where he tried to define a figure. So figure is first defined as that which follows color, because figures are always colorful. But Meno reminds us that color does not tell us what figure is, since figure is not colorful as a figure, but as a plane, as a surface. However, figure is a plane with limits, and what by nature limits the surface is the solid. So we have, in the end, the definition of the figure in the Meno. Figure is the limit of a solid. So if the associated, so I kind of made a tableau to explain more simply the difference between considering the kind being as associative power and consider the kind sameness as associative power. So if associative kind is sameness, the kind associates one with another through their sameness, then we realize that figure only unites with color as plane. In other words, figure and color are one thanks to their common relation of sameness to plane. But in fact, figure and color are not directly associated with each other. Furthermore, it is a relation between limit and solid rather than the individual relation that figure has with them that constitutes its essence, its essential definition, and capture the proportionate relation between limit, solid, plane. This distinguishes totally the kind figure from all other kinds. And as a consequence, figure is put into relation with its essence, the limit of the solid, just as 1 + 1 is placed into relation with 2. The power of being of the figure is the power always to associate and to divide in the same way, so that the particular relation between limit, solid, and surface, well, that is plane, is same as what figure is, always in the same way. So, so to conclude, in considering the power of being as communing power that associates through sameness and divides through difference, the communion of kinds makes it possible not only to know about something, but also to know the thing in itself and by itself. And this can be achieved by examining what is about this being. Being is therefore nothing other than this communing power. And at the same time, the communion of kinds does not make kind or forms relative. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yu-Jung, for the talk. So we have indeed between 10 and 12 minutes for the question and the discussion. So again, any question, just end up on the screen, and you will be able to ask your question. So there is one question from Pauline.
Yes. So thank you very much, Yu-Jung, for this very rich presentation. And it was very interesting to see how you connect so many passages, not only in the Sophist, but outside of the Sophist. So I find your idea that being is power very, very attractive and very interesting. I have a worry in your, what you say against the other interpretations of the dunamis proposal, and how your own interpretations tend to this, because I was wondering at some point, I understand how to some extent you do differ from them, but I was wondering if someone were just to, textually tell you, then what do you, the dunamis proposal happens at one passage, and right after this, there's this idea that it's not, that the front of the form would say that it's not enough. I think it's ikanos or something. And then finally, you have the conclusion of the Gigantomachia passage. So it's very end, 249, D something, where it's about change and rest this time. So I was wondering whether your interpretation how your interpretation could better react than these other interpretations to the textual claim that say, well, it's very good, and perhaps there is something very interesting in this, but textually, I don't see, for instance, how it squares with the conclusion of the Gigantomachia passage, but is again about change and rest. Especially because at some point you said, I think you said all attempts to give an account of being on the basis of quantity and quality fail. But then again, at the end of the Gigantomachia passage, what we have at least, there are many ways of reading this, but it's something about change and rest, which can be read as, again, reasserting something about quantity, about quality. So yeah, I was wondering if you have an answer to this.
Okay. Okay. The first question about if the dunamis proposal is only concentrated in the passage 247 to 249, is that I have just shown that this I don't know where is it anymore. I was trying to I just show the passage very briefly, but I was trying to say that actually there is a continuity, that he continues to talk about the dunamis, or the power to Koinōnia afterward. So yeah, we can find the power to Koinōnia even in the 254 and after. So the idea is to construct a continuity between the first version of the dunamis proposal that define being as the power to act and be acted upon, and later as the power to Koinōnia, to put into relation. So this is first part. It is really not clear what happened in the Sophist at the end of the debate with the giants and the friends of reform. So we know that the position of the giant is refuted, and the position of friend of reform as the version how it presented is also rejected. The problem is what it follows when we start talking about the kind change, rest. We are not, at least I am not very sure that it is about defining being anymore. And this is why I didn't take into account the whole megastakene as a definition of being, but because what he said that what we need to do is to find how being associate to each other, and that's what I concentrated in.
Thank you. I think there's another question, so better, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, there is a question from Michael.
Yeah, thanks for the paper. This is the passage you're working on, like the dunamis proposal, is something that I continually struggle with. So one thing I've been thinking about, and I'm wondering how your account would sort of handle this sort of worry, is at 255 E down to 256 D, where we get the claim that motion is because it participates in being, and then motion is and isn't on or being because it participates in being later. So if motion is a being because it participates in being, then doesn't it seem like it already would have to have the ability to commune or participate before it could participate in being? And so if we're going to read being as the power to participate or commune or whatever, then what's going on with that claim? Because it seems like motion would already have to be able to participate or commune with being in order to participate in it and therefore become a being. So how, does your account like have a way to respond to that worry or an explanation for it?
No, not really. That's a very good question. Well, I think the first, this is a very tricky question because it is somehow a bit circular. You need to be a being in order to participate being, and it is somehow actually quite weird. What I understand that is rather to see it for another way to say that actually when we are talking about being, when we are talking about change and its participation in being, it is already a being. It is already in being, so that we can connect to it. So that is why I try to say that the kind being is the kind that actually allows us to say anything about something.
Okay.
Well, I can only say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any more question? We still have a little bit of time, so if there is another question or comment, it is possible to make it. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, I've got another question, I guess, if no one else has anything. So a direction that I've kind of gone in recently in trying to think of this is that perhaps the notion of dunamis develops as we go. So it starts out where being is the power to affect and be affected, or to commune or to associate, but then perhaps dunamis gets narrowed, where dunamis comes to mean not just being, but the nature of any form, because in the response to the late learners, the power, it isn't just being, or dunamis, as it's talked about there, the power to commune with some or to fit together with some, but not with others. So it's not just the power to associate, but the power to associate with specific others. And so yeah, I've kind of been thinking in the direction of, well, maybe it starts out with the dunamis proposal, when we're getting this claim that beings are nothing other than dunamis. What we mean there is that beings are nothing other than an ability to associate in general, but then as this goes on and we get the response to the late learners, we get a narrower sense of dunamis, where it means to associate with particular others instead of just associate in general. So yeah, I mean, this isn't, I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that, or if that's compatible with what you're doing, or yeah, if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay, yes, totally. That's why I bring up the text from the Republic to say something about the dunamis and how it is defined in the Republic, because in the Republic, but it is actually possible to define a particular power by searching out how it communes other things and the effects that it produces. So what I was trying to do is to claim that it is possible to define each particular being because it has a particular power to commune in a specific way. And this part I didn't have time to develop anyway. But for a sensible particular, its being will have the power to commune in a certain sense, always in the same way for one part, and sometimes with certain kinds, sometimes with others for another part, because it's a sensible particular. While the kinds or four intelligible forms, they will commune, that means associate and divide always in the same way. So in the end, they can be identified and they can be defined as a specific kind or sensible or particular.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Very short, so we still have like maybe 2 minutes and two people. So a very short comment or question from Pauline first.
Well, since I asked a question already, I suggest that Edward go first. Yes.
Edward then. Okay,
well, thank you, Pauline. Just a very short suggestion that when Michael asked his first question, Yu-Jung responded by saying, that's really weird. And the question was, what about that passage where he says, what about the powers of motion? And what kind of communion does it have? It presumes some sort of being. So I just wanted to make a suggestion that we read it as a kind of reflexivity, that to talk about what motion is already to talk about its power and is already to assume that it's a being. And if you read it as a reflexivity, it reinforces your account, I think.
Thank you very much. Totally agree with you.
Pauline, do you want to ask a last thing?
Yeah, I can do. It's actually more a friendly suggestion. I was wondering whether you could make use of the famously difficult, dialectic passage at 253. DE 254, yeah, for your claim.
One and many, yes. Well, that is part I would really love to treat, but all these passages very problematic, and there's a lot of debate on all these passages. That is why I left it out, because it is very complex to talk about. But the idea is to say that understanding the power of being in this way allowed us to understand actually the different type of relation, especially in this part of dialectics. They present 4 types of one and many relations. So we have the individual, one to the many, many to one, and the 2 different kinds encompassed by the third thing, and so on. Well, it is in my paper, but I couldn't say anything about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We are absolutely on time, right on time. So I want to thank again our 3 speakers for the wonderful session, and everybody for the question and the discussion. Unfortunately, it would be now the time for the coffee break, but unfortunately we cannot have coffee together. We need to go to separate ways. But the next session will start actually pretty soon, in 15 minutes at 11:15 by Lima time. I don't know if Raoul wants to say something to close the session. No. So you there is no. You should put your microphone if you want to say something.
Sorry, I forget always this. But okay, thanks to the speakers and to you, Luca. We just have this 15 minutes pause now, and we go further. Okay, bye. We'll continue. Patricio.
Sí, profesor, ya terminamos la grabación.